For centuries, gold was the one thing governments could not touch. It did not rust, it could not be printed like paper, and its value did not change from one geography to another. It shone the same in London, in Cairo, and in Beijing. It was the closest thing humanity ever had to a universal truth, until governments discovered ways to steal it from themselves. This video looks into that dark intersection where money, power, and history collide. Because the biggest gold thefts in history were not carried out by masked thieves or underground tunnels. They were never done with guns. The real heist happened through signatures behind closed doors, small legal changes, and policy decisions no one saw. When a country manipulates its own gold, nobody calls it theft. They call it something else, policy. To understand how this game began, we must return to the era when gold was not just wealth, but money itself. In the 19th century, the world operated under the gold standard. The dollar, the pound, the franc, all major currencies were fixed to a specific amount of gold. If you held a banknote, you could go to the central bank and demand the metal it represented. The system rested on trust and discipline. Governments could only print as much money as they had gold in their vaults. But discipline has always been one of humanity's weakest traits. When wars erupted and debt exploded, the rule was quietly bent. More paper was printed than the gold in the vaults. At first a little, then more. The gold standard turned into more of an illusion than gold. As long as the vaults stayed shut, no one faced the truth. The public believed the gold was still inside, and that was all that mattered. This fragile order completely broke during World War I. European governments, desperate for funding, suspended the gold standard, confiscated citizens' gold, and gave them only paper in return. Bank vaults were locked, gold vanished from circulation. A heist took place, but it wasn't done by thieves. It was done by governments, and the justification was very noble, financing the war. When the war ended, the picture was even darker. Economies collapsed, currencies eroded, millions of savings disappeared. Germany's mark became worthless. Austria, Hungary, Russia, all the same story. Gold became the only safe haven in the eyes of the public, and that made it dangerous, because gold exposed how worthless paper money really was. Instead of confronting that truth, governments chose to control it. In 1933, U.S. President Roosevelt signed one of the most controversial orders in history, Executive Order 6102. With this order, Americans were banned from owning gold. Their gold was forcibly handed over to the state at $20.67 per ounce. The public had no choice, either surrender the gold or go to prison. What happened next? Within just a few months, the government raised the price of gold to $35. On paper, nothing seemed to change, yet the value of the gold inside Washington's vaults increased by 70% overnight. Ordinary people had been legally robbed, but once again, this robbery was called policy. From this moment on, gold manipulation became a standard tool of governments. Because if gold defined the value of money, then controlling gold meant controlling reality itself. By the end of World War II, the U.S. had become the global gold superpower. Europe was in ruins, and America's vaults held more than 20,000 tons of gold. This power allowed the U.S. to shape the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. World currencies were tied to the dollar, and the dollar was tied to gold. But this system relied on trust, and trust, like gold, is limited. After the Nixon shock, the official message was, gold no longer matters. But the reality was completely different. In the decades after the 1970s, central banks secretly lent, sold, repurchased, and swapped gold with one another. They gave it an innocent name, reserve management. But what they were really hiding was simple. Gold was still in the game. It was just being played behind the curtain. The first major move of this new game came in the late 1990s. While the world believed in globalization and the limitless power of paper finance, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, made a surprising announcement. More than half of Britain's gold reserves, nearly 400 tons, would be sold. The official reason? Diversification. The reality? Prices collapsed. Gold fell to a 20-year low. A few years later, when prices tripled, everything became clear. Britain had sold at almost the bottom. Some called it Brown's bottom. Others were harsher. They claimed the sale was a hidden bailout to help major financial institutions close short positions in gold. Whatever the truth, it marked a turning point. The West was no longer the protector of gold. It had become its manager. Gold, in the hands of governments, transformed from the world's oldest money into a technical financial instrument. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was not watching silently. From the 2000s onward, China, Russia, India, and many others began accumulating gold again, not for a collection, but for power. While the West sold the story, gold doesn't matter anymore, Eastern nations understood something else. Gold might not support currencies anymore, but it still supported confidence. And in times of crisis, confidence was worth more than the weight of gold itself. Another disturbing truth emerged during this period. No one truly knows how much gold any country actually owns. Take the United States. Official number? 8,133 tons. But this figure has not been independently audited since 1953. Occasionally, calls for audits appeared, but they were forgotten each time. The vaults stayed shut, and the same old photos were given to the press. Why so much secrecy? Because gold is not just a reserve, it is a thermometer of trust. If the world believed the US did not have the gold it claimed, the global financial system would shake overnight. And trust is the only thing that can replace money, but governments cannot print it. The 2008 crisis changed gold's destiny once again. As trust in banks and paper currencies collapsed, gold returned to the world stage, not as a standard, but as a warning signal. Germany demanded the return of its gold, stored in New York and Paris. The Netherlands and Austria followed. They all said the same thing: let the gold stay with us, not with others. By the 2000s, this movement accelerated. China regularly increased its monthly gold purchases. Russia nearly doubled its reserves. Countries excluded from the US dollar system, such as Iran and Turkey, began using gold in trade to bypass sanctions. It was a quiet rebellion, bar by bar, ounce by ounce. The US, meanwhile, turned to different tools to maintain the dominance of the dollar. Gold was no longer behind the currency. Instead, geopolitical power, military influence, energy control, and the global banking network supported it. But even this foundation began to crack, because while the West printed trillions, emerging economies turned not to paper, but to metal. By the 2020s, something historic happened. Central banks bought more than 1,000 tons of gold in a single year. It was the largest accumulation in modern history. This wasn't an investment. It was preparation for a coming global reset. Now, manipulation wasn't in the vaults. It was in the markets. The global price of gold was no longer determined by physical metal, but by paper gold contracts in London and New York, many of which did not represent real gold. For every physical ounce, dozens of paper ounces circulated. The reason the price had been suppressed for years became clearer. Control perception, and you control value. As digital currencies, political fractures, and rising inflation eroded trust again, people returned to a simple truth: gold does not lie. This story is not finished. The new Great Gold Heist no longer targets citizens, it targets states. Governments are competing to seize each other's gold, recall reserves, and rewrite the rules before a new order is established. Asia, especially China, now controls most of the world's newly mined gold. Western dominance after a century is wavering, and history has repeated one lesson many times: when gold moves, empires move. In the end, gold is not just a metal, it is a mirror, reflecting a nation's deepest fears and expectations. And in this era built on infinite debt, gold is a dangerous reminder. Real value cannot be manipulated. The Great Gold Heist is not over. It never actually ended. It only became known by a more polite name: central banking. If what I've shared today helped you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to subscribe. Because history always has an answer, you just need to look from the right angle. And I'm here to help you find those answers, buried in the dusty pages of financial history.